Welcome to Sacred, the podcast that invites you to reclaim your intuition, resist exploitive systems, and remember the love that brought you to teaching and caregiving in the first place.
We're your hosts,
Angela Carolina Garcia
and Lauren Stobble. Join us on a rough and tumble journey of reckoning and transformation.
Hi, listeners. Welcome. Thank you for being here. For this episode, we'll be talking with one of our healing-centered education teachers, Dr. Kia Darling-Hammond. Dr. Kia is a psychologist, researcher, educator, and coach, as well as creator of the Bridge to Thriving framework. She co-authored The Civil Rights Road to Deeper Learning, 5 Essentials for Equity, and co-editor of T is Thriving, Blueprints of Affirming Trans and Gender Creative Lives and Learning in Schools. Welcome, Dr. Kia.
And before we begin, let's get ourselves grounded. So whether you're standing or sitting, take a moment to feel what you're sitting on or standing on beneath you. And from that awareness, breathe in and feel your breath coming into the body, and then breathe out. Feel the breath going out of the body. And breathing in, feeling the breath coming in, and breathing out, feeling the breath coming out. And on the part of the earth where I live right now, it's a windy time, and the wind is doing an important job of moving seeds, putting things where they need to be. And sometimes that can be a little disorienting, especially if we resist, right? So if that's happening on your part of the earth as well, see if you can kind of feel your relationship with wind, with air today. Maybe the air is still around you. Maybe you can feel air moving gently on the surface of your skin, or perhaps you can hear it passing by your ears. Maybe you can't feel it at all, and that's okay too. Just notice what your relationship is with that air quality that has a potential to move things, but also the potential to be still and kind of hold us. And bringing your attention back to your breath as it moves right through the air, breathing in and out. And as you're ready, if your eyes were closed or lowered, bringing your awareness back into the space, the physical space where you are, you can look to the right, look to the left. Maybe circle your shoulders a little bit, a little movement through your joints. And then join us for a sacred conversation. Welcome, Dr. Kia. We're so excited that you're here.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
And maybe our listeners might know something about you, and they heard about the title of your book has the word thriving in it. This is like a big topic that we've been talking about on this podcast. And we were so grateful to be able to learn from you more about that thing, which we are so curious about as students. And so maybe just share something about, what brings you to this place in the healing centered education world, or even to be like, how did your journey bring you to this, looking closely at thriving?
Yes. So I think there were many markers along the way, in my life. But the place where it really solidified for me was when I was teaching high school. And I actually was when I was teaching high school and as I shifted into administration, school administration. And many of the challenges that we were having in schooling as educators and the challenges that our students were having that we couldn't solve
were pointing to the need to focus beyond what we were focusing on. And so in schooling, we tend to focus on success and achieving very specific educational milestones. But we tend to then, they do a better job of this at the elementary levels, but then we sort of lose focus on the larger developmental picture and the whole child, and the whole human and the whole lifespan as we move into the sort of more stringent, structured, sorting and competitive sort of nature of high school. And I had students who were really, really trying to self actualize, and we, the school, were getting in the way. And I had students who were really trying to self actualize, and it was really unclear to the caring and concerned adults in their lives how to help them get onto a path and into a context that would allow that to happen fully. So I was observing this and noticing this and frustrated by this, but it didn't really crystallize for me until I was having a conversation with one of my former students, one of my nibblings, about their life. And, now, I've known this young person now for almost 20 years, right? So this was, several years ago. And they were done with high school, and they were trying to finish up college, and they were thinking about the future, and we were talking about their needs, and we just landed on this, I just want to be able to thrive. I just want to be able to be whole and exist fully. And I said, oh, I want to know more about how that works, right? Yes, thank you. So it coalesced in this concept of thriving. And then as I was moving through my doctoral program, I decided to look into what the world had to say about thriving, but especially for people who are marginalized or multiply marginalized, right? This young person is Black and queer and young, right? And so I went and I looked in the ed literature and I looked in the psych literature, and I just didn't find very much that was about actually thriving. I found a ton about resilience and coping and grit, but very little that was in the space of visionary imagining, that was in the space of beyond survival. And the places where I found that, the sort of speculative fiction discourses, the philosophy, that wasn't finding its way into psych and ed. So I said, okay, let me build a bridge between the two. And that's the focus of my work.
Wow, thank you. That's all like this. Like, I suppose it leads us into the first question. How might we sense into ancestral knowledge rather than reinforce survival mechanisms that are no longer serving us? And how do we distinguish between the urge to survive and move to thrive?
I think one thing that I think is really important to acknowledge is that survival work is real work in the world. And increasingly, a lot of us do have to pour a lot of attention into that. One of the challenges that presents, it's a longstanding challenge, is that it makes it very difficult to pour attention into either doing things that allow thriving or designing for things that allow for thriving in the future, whether that's for us or for other people. So I just want to acknowledge that part of what I'm not telling people they shouldn't focus on survival. You do have to have a roof over your head. You do have to feed yourself, these sorts of things. And really the call is to work in community with other people to create the conditions for designing for thriving now and in the future. So just want to lay the groundwork there. Sensing into what is keeping us, that's what's survival and not thriving. Oh, I mean, it's a big question. I think that's probably a pretty individual and subjective question. I can speak for myself, and just to tell you a bit about what I've learned. When I'm making decisions from a place of fear, or scarcity, I'm probably in survival mode, right? So if I am, as opposed to making decisions from a place of what's possible, from a place of abundance, from a place of hope. And some of those things may be patterns. So patterns of behavior that get us in trouble over and over again are a great signal to where we might be in like sort of survival mode, scarcity mindset, right? And I'm not casting aspersions about that at all, right? We develop our survival toolkit out of necessity, right? That comes from lived experience. And sometimes, often, it's very difficult to figure that out on our own, that we're in a pattern. It's usually the people around us who are like, "Whoop, here she goes again. Should we say something?" And so what I would say as a piece of advice that's worked for me is tell your people to say something. It's like, if you see me doing this nonsense, please just speak up. I might not want to hear, but I do need to hear it, right? And be receptive to people letting you know, like, hey, sis, are you sure you wanna, like that again, in my own life, there were meaningful health consequences. So and this is sort of tied into the whole thriving versus surviving thing. You sort of get trained into this idea that you do all these things right, go to school, get good grades, get a job, blah, blah, blah. And then you're going to be fine. And that's how you succeed, in life. And I, again, no shade, only love to all the people who I encountered on the journey to this epiphany. I kept working in these W-2 jobs where, I was in an organization and there were staff and a boss and all these things. And those cultures kept being really, really toxic to the people in the culture. People would get sick. They wouldn't be allowed to be sick, take time off, those sorts of things. There'd be a lot of threatening people with bad consequences in order to achieve certain outcomes. Like, if you don't, I can't believe y'all didn't see this, somebody's about to get fired, that kind of energy. And at a certain point, I ran out of physiological runway to tolerate being in spaces like that. But I kept going into those spaces because they felt the most secure, right? I was like, oh, that's a salary, that's benefits. For me, and this is just speaking for me, the big shift was when I had an opportunity to move out of that world and into my own solopreneur life. And it is not stressful to work for yourself. However, the kinds of stressors are very different. And so I think being tuned into what was making me feel overly exhausted, and then, I was going, oh, but I've got to do this, instead of going, I am overly exhausted. Do I have to do this? And the only reason really that I was able to make an escape, though, was because of my community. I needed to be supported by other people in order to, one, have the epiphany, two, work through the fear and the scarcity that would have kept me in these kinds of roles and environments, and three, resource the shift in my life. So I often think about mutual aid and the strength of community as one of the critical ways that people create enough spaciousness, because folks are really in survival mode and it's systemic, right? It's imposed. I think that the Acosta Institute does a great job of creating spaces where people can do this kind of reflection too. And so I would say, where there are containers for breathing and pausing or slowing down and really checking in with your body, there's magic there, because your body's definitely trying to tell you. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about there was a time in my life where it was really, I mean, this is something I've worked on my whole life, is like having like the right amount of work. I have been self-employed, and that was, for me, that was harder in the other direction because I couldn't say no to work. And then I ended up with too much work. But and in these different transitions in my life, I started to get ocular migraines, and I worked with kids. So if I all of a sudden I can't see the children anymore, and that's part of my job description, I need to go home. So I was just like, okay, my body is literally stopping me from doing the work that I was supposed to do today. That was a very helpful information. And I didn't grow up with take this medicine and make it go away. Luckily, I'm very grateful for that but I did grow up with the like muscle through it. But the particular way that my body was communicating with me was I just could not ignore it. I could not, it wasn't related to muscles. I just couldn't see. So I do appreciate that. And there are lots of other more subtle messages that are much harder for me to notice. If something goes up on with my digestion. I'm a little slow on the uptake. Like I'm 44 now. It's taken me like 10 years to kind of realize that those are important messages. You're like, oh, I think I'm doing too many things. Yeah.
I'm like thinking a little bit about resilience and like how thriving and resilience tend to like sort of overlap each other or be considered like synonymous. And I'm wondering if you can maybe share a little bit more between the distinction of those two things and how they sort of like maybe meander together.
Absolutely. I would say they are distinct. Resilience is bouncing back, being able to weather, coping. Whereas thriving is, being able to have vibrancy, to, self-actualize. It's beyond just getting by, right? It's the resources to, do the vibrant things, not just the resources to pay the bills. Or, from a mindset standpoint, being able to dream, be hopeful, be imaginative, be innovative. That's sort of more in the thriving universe. And thriving, so as a concept, it's again kind of subjective, right? What I think is thriving for me may not be what you think is thriving for you. And, in a field, in an academic field like psychology, or education, we're always sort of trying to put boundaries around things and be like, this is this, but that is that, right? So we'll distinguish between flourishing and thriving. Well, flourishing is very individual, but thriving is very, community centric, or well-being takes into account systems. So is thriving flourishing plus well-being? Maybe, you know, so I think they do meander together. And just broadly speaking, thriving is a bit more than resilience, right? It's, self-actualization, it's well-being, it's health, it's, vibrancy. And that's not to say that resilience isn't crucial, right? Because we don't thrive unless we weather, right? So they live in the same universe of experience. I think the concern that I have especially in systems in a society, or in societies that are so deeply steeped in bias and inequity and violence, is that stopping at resilience prevents us from being innovative toward designing the world that's not this world. And that's the key for me. And I think of that as a capital D danger. Dreaming and hopefulness and resistance and refusal and defiance are crucial aspects of the liberation, movement, and, broadly speaking, liberation movements. And if we pour all of our energy and resources and our training and our professional development and all those things into resilience, we're missing the mark, because we're just going to keep replicating the limitations. So that's sort of where I come from with that.
I'm wondering, you said self-actualization the second time, and that reminds me of other times that I've heard you talk up in Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes up, and there might be some early childhood students listening to this. Does now feel like the right time to kind of to go into that? I know sometimes you're like, this is not the time, but I wonder if this might be the time. I've always been curious what that means to you.
Yeah. So I do understand that we we are often in our fields, right, trained with Maslow in mind. And so I always want to point to the fact that Maslow's ideas about self-actualization and sort of community and human care were deeply, deeply, deeply informed by Siksika culture, the Blackfoot community. And his hierarchy that people see, he didn't create that. So that's like, it's kind of important to kind of like go, oh, Maslow, self-actualization, hierarchy of needs. Okay, no, that was created by some economist who was trying to get people to rationalize getting other people to work harder. Right?
Ooh,
Oh,
yeah.
gross, right?
Yeah.
Ew.
Yeah.
What?
So if we can just shift to self-actualization, in Maslow's language, this has been, actually published, so it's easy to find a record of it. He talks about it as a person being able to become all that they are capable of becoming. Sort of like, and if we move then back to Siksika wisdom, it's this idea that we come into this world self-actualized, which is to say we are whole and with a sort of a spark of divinity in us. And the Siksika engagement with that is it's the community's job to create the conditions for the human to present themselves, their whole self into the world successfully. So you're already whole, you're already self-actualized. And what we do is then we create the conditions for that expression with attention to the ways that you are irreplaceable and unique and special and miraculous and magical, right? And that we all are. When we create the conditions for the human to express their wholeness in its fullness, that fuels what in Siksika culture will be considered cultural actualization or community actualization. So when we're able to be all of who we can be, then we are great community members. And the community is also self-actualizing. So we're taking care of ourselves so that we can make a contribution to the collective that's positive, that's, additive, you know, that's in alignment. And when we look at places where communities and cultures and societies are really, really mucky, we often find that there are self-actualization wounds and belongingness wounds that are creating conflict and friction and suffering. So this is actually really wise. And then when the individual is able to be in the community in a way that's great for the community, and the community is able to wrap around the individual in a way that's great for the individual, and we're in sort of like a synchronicity that creates the conditions for us to what Siksika, sort of the Siksika philosophy might call cultural perpetuity, right? And this gets into that sort of 7 generations of well-being and wisdom. Like we don't have to worry about losing our stories or our practices or the love that's been cultivated, because all of this self and community actualization is fueling not only the creation of these beautiful things that are possible in human society, but also the their perpetuity, their passage and spreading and passing down over time, so we don't lose so much. And I think this is something that we grapple with, those of us who care about healing centered, who care about history, who care about communities that have been deliberately marginalized. We lose our histories, we lose our stories, we lose our languages because of colonialism, because of capitalism, because of that orientation toward production and extraction and efficiency instead of community and connection and love and coming together. And so you can see systems and structures that get in the way, right? Not being able to live within easy walking distance of your immediate community, families that can't count on, friends and family to help raise the kids. These kinds of things start to really show up. So shifting it back, in the language of Maslow, self-actualization could be considered being able to become all that you're capable of becoming. And those of us, I think, who are in sort of middle life also can relate to that sense of longing. Like, am I of me? I really wanted to do something else, but here I am doing this thing. Maybe I'm in survival mode. And through the lens of that Siksika wisdom, and it's not just theirs. I mean, there are other indigenous philosophies that get at this too. It's fundamentally that you are inherently whole, and you are, as my godmother would say, you are a manifestation of the beloved in flesh, right? And we all are, right? We are singular, we are irreplicable, we are absolutely unique. The fact that we even made it to the point where we could breathe breath in these bodies is actually miraculous. That is not easy. That is not an easy thing to grow a human and then to deliver that human into the world successfully. And then for that human to continue to persist. These are not givens, these are miracles. And so I think self-actualization in that regard is in some ways about living in your fullness, being whole. And then our job as a society, as a community, is to create the conditions for that to be expressed.
So beautiful. I'm thinking about, like, the seeds came to me earlier today, and now I'm thinking about seeds again. And my goddaughter's name, the translation of her name, and I forget which language because it means a lot of different things, is I am. And I just remember it, like, as with this God baby, I was just like, wow, this is my job as a godmother, right? To see who this person is, to see who she becomes. And I think I think a lot of people love to be with young children because it's so magical to see someone becoming. But it is a shift that feels so right to me to say, well, they've already become. And it's making me think of, like, Sister Solana's episode and how she was talking, right? The child is here to be our teacher. It's like from day one, they are already our teacher. And so I think we're so curious, like, who's the child going to become? We talk about that. I wonder who they're going to be, or, but they already are, right? As soon as they're here, they are. So I think that's a very empowering way to receive a child into the world.
What I would add, and this takes us back to that, like, tuning into scarcity and in survival mode, is yes, we can really give a gift of curiosity to young people where we're looking for who they're showing us that they are. And when we're raising children in a society and systems like this, we inevitably end up thinking about their safety and their longevity through the lens of, I'm raising this Black child, and I have to make sure that they understand that there are ways they have to be in order to maximize their survival. So there's this other dimension, this other call that's about this bigger work because we have to survive. And so survival, the conditions under which we have to survive will dictate the extent to which we feel we can be authentic. And that will change across the lifespan. But who we believe we must be in order to survive as young people will absolutely inform how we function as older people, as adults in particular. So there is this, I think this is why we can't disregard survival and resilience and coping when we talk about thriving. That's why it's not what do they call it? Toxic positivity. It's really a dream and a hope that we can continue, that the more and more of us will tune into the demand, like our right to thrive, and become really unapologetic about fighting for that in a big way. So dismantling systems, refusing necropolitics, just simply not cooperating. Right. And there are risks associated with that. There's a reason why a general strike in the US will take years to plan, right? It's not a thing where we can all just be like, well, I'm not going to work.
Right.
And it's because of how much is at stake.
I kind of want to talk a little bit more about dreaming, because dreaming reminds me of playing and how those two things go together. And maybe that's also me resisting going deeper into these other things that are coming into my brain. But how do we remember to envision, cultivate, and play in a third space in relationship to how resilience and survival and coping and thriving sort of exist? And sometimes it's also partial when you're thriving.
I mean, and again, this is kind of subjective, right? How does any one person, structure play into their life? Or some of it could be mindset, just orientation toward play, because like there are people who just sort of have a playful air, are joking, are laughing about. I will say one of the things my sister taught me, my sister has dealt with chronic illness for a very, very long time and has developed this really kind of what we would call like a gallows humor. She's just kind of wry and, laughs about things that maybe other people might cry about, and, that can include just her body deciding. She's like, well, I woke up to do this and then my body said no. And, big wry chuckle, and just like this, there's a way that she, and she laughs about what she can laugh about. There's a way that she has let go in the process of letting go of any attachment to being whoever she thought she was going to become and accepting that she is who she is. And letting go of any attachment to this idea that life should be a particular way or the world should be a particular way, and simply going, oh, I guess this is what it is. It's created spaciousness for her to actually really enjoy what she can enjoy about life and living. And so I think there's a mindset dimension to this, which is, probably taking us back to like Zen Buddhism and releasing attachment and these kinds of things. There's also a piece of this that's about really getting real about the hard things. So like if you let yourself mourn, you're going to probably have an easier time letting yourself laugh, right? So there's this thing about the wisdom of like feeling our authentic feelings without judgment, without shame, and letting them exist and moving through them then with a greater sense of peace and calm. But there's also a piece of this that's about demand. And, if your life is not creating enough space for play, you can look at your life and go, is there anything here that I could let go of or move, or get help with so that I have a little bit more spaciousness? So for example, I'm in a group of nerdy adults who play Dungeons and Dragons every other Sunday for like 4 hours, and I love it.
Amazing.
Some of the people in the group have kids. So a thing that they've figured out how to do to make that possible is to get childcare Sunday afternoon, right? And that's not easy to do. I'm not saying that flippantly, like childcare is not a huge challenge, because it is. And it's possible to reach out to your community and be like, hey, I just need coverage for these 4 hours every other Sunday. Help. One of my colleagues and friends in grad school had to have a pretty major surgery and, was living here, but had family in a whole other state. So their sort of support network was in a whole other state. So me and a handful of other grad students who were friends got organized. And I don't remember who made the spreadsheet. Somebody brilliant made a spreadsheet that was essentially like, who's going to stay with this person when? And we created a schedule, and people just showed up to be present. There were instructions about the medication. There were instructions about food and water and care. And so we just showed up. And for the period of their recovery, which was, I think, roughly about a week, we just rotated and cycled through and made sure that that person was never by themselves. So I know that's not about play, but this is about spaciousness, right? And creating, and you'll hear me continue to loop back to the power of community and mutual care, because I'm just present to the fact that so many of us are in survival mode because we have jobs and obligations to family. That might be children, that might be elders. And, we're also supposed to somehow exercise and eat well and meal prep and sleep and, don't forget to take your vitamins, which I've literally forgotten to do today. And we're supposed, and now that I remember, I will take them, but we're supposed to do all of these things as if those things aren't made possible by a community. They're made possible by a community. Third spaces keep disappearing. So perhaps the answer is to claim what third spaces remain and to build additional ones, but that you don't do that by yourself unless you're I do have a friend who's intrepid and could single-handedly be like, I've opened a community center, and everybody oh, that, that is one very unique person. I cannot open a community. You know what I mean? Like that. I don't have the spoons for that. I don't have the cortisol for that. I don't have the estrogen for that. I don't have it. Okay. But some other people do. This is me talking about chronic illness and menopause, but whatever. That's a whole other thing. But in community, we can do that. In community, we can reclaim parks as a community. And in community, we can, in these cities where people have decided to say you have to get a permit to use public space, which is just so gross. We can be let's get that effing permit. Who's on it, right? And let's get that permit for the next, I don't know, 6 weeks so our kids can play at the effing park. I feel very strongly about people who reduce access to public space. I think that is scarcity mindset viciousness, and I don't approve of it. Say that on the record. So, but yeah, I think there are things that you can do. I've noticed, I'm in a community where people don't really listen to music. They'll even have parties and there's no music. I'm like, y'all, what? I don't understand this, because music is absolutely magical. And it can, in and of itself, transport you into a place of, nostalgia, of visioning, of choreographing, of whatever. Music is powerful. So I would say at the smallest level, it's put on some headphones and hit up that playlist from when you were in high school, or, put on your cleaning mix and dance around and do whatever. You don't have to be cleaning, just be hyped, get in your car where your, speakers are good. I don't know, do what you got to do. But, and I think this does come back to mindset too, where it's just we deserve to be happy and to play and to laugh and to be joyful. So you could take stock right now of the people and the places and the conditions or the context that are more likely to inspire you to laugh and feel joyful and go, I'm going to commit to putting more of that into my life. More. And you can also similarly be what's the stuff that's draining me, making me feel hopeless, whatever, and commit to having less of that in your life as well. Whenever I do this work in my coaching work, there's always at least one breakup. There's always at least one person who's oh. And 2 months later, they're happily single, But that is what it is. You do deserve.
Yeah. It's reminding me of an abuelita's house. An abuelita's house, right? She had all of these babies and they grew up and they are very different humans. But they show up for Sunday dinner with their kids. They show up for all the Thanksgiving, Christmas, and it's all of the things all at once, all of the politics, all of the religions, all of the beliefs, all of the differences. But abuelita has mastered, we're still getting the tamales done. Like, we're still going to eat turkey together, and like, we're going to move through this. That's what it's making me think. I also like get to go home very soon. So like, I'm imagining going and doing all of those things, which I'm very excited about. But as you were talking, and as you were like making space, right? Like, we're making space, and how do we tap into community? And I was recently on a drive to Vermont, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, I'm sure. And on this drive to Vermont, there's like trees, and you're like on the highway, but there's only trees, and that's pretty typical in New England. And like, we're like, we've like created ways to make pathways through mountains. But I was telling Lauren, like Mother Earth just like abruptly, like something like abrupted her, and she like was forced to make space for the cars and the highways. But like, somehow she's like just like embraced us, because it's like the grass keeps growing in between the cracks, um and the flowers get to grow, and like, the animals find a way to cross the highways, right? Like, there's even signs that say this is going to happen probably. And so I'm thinking a little bit about earth rhythms, and how do we connect to our earth rhythms and care for ourselves and for each other in the process of discernment and wanting to connect.
So many ways. And I can say, I will say it's interesting to think about and to come into awareness of anything that's getting in the way of connection. I think that's a piece of it. For me, I'll tell you what it is for me. Okay, I have ADHD. And one of the things that they talk about with ADHD is object permanence, not having it. It's like, if it's gone, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Yes. Okay.
That one of the sad dimensions of that experience for a lot of us is, if a person is out of sight, they are also out of mind. And so I actually have a an actual diagram, like an image with the names of people, which I'm constantly adding to, who I'm like, don't forget about these people. And so I'll go and I'll refer back to that, so that I'm making a concerted effort to create connection, right? To be like, hey, it's a text message or a phone call or sending a meme or whatever it is. So I think there's that piece, which is just like, don't forget the people exist, and then make sure that you reach out to them. I say that also because I live in a universe full of people with a lot of anxiety who, like, for whom reaching out is its own, like, like, it's a source of tension. So I think it's important to explicitly pour care and attention into cultivating connection, right? Making sure that's happening. And then I think that, being able to connect to other human beings requires, like, meaningfully connect. It requires a lot of vulnerability um and I think, and compassion and patience and all of these things. So when this is not exactly as, like, I don't know, optimistic, but I think one of the fun things that I've seen a lot of people in my life, and I've had to deal with myself, is not showing up to things when you don't have the spoons, so that the quality of the connection isn't undermined by your lack of energy or motivation. And this brings us back to, I think, Lauren, you were talking about, I think no is a sacred promise to self and to others, right? Like, your no is sacred. And so, like, when you were talking about having too much work and not feeling like you could say no, I think that's, like, a nice flag. This brings us back to scarcity, but it also brings us back to connection. Show up when you can. Don't show up if you can't, right? If the quality of how you show up isn't going to be good, but do show up. And I think it can be really hard. It can be hard when you're tired or exhausted, but do it. Show up if you can. And don't if you can't, and know the difference. But in terms of just really meaningful interpersonal connection, there's an honesty there, right? It's like, be you. This brings us back to self-actualization. I was on a call with a colleague, and his daughter was about to like go out the door to an event. And he said to me, he's like, hey, do you have any advice for making friends? And I said, be you, because anyone who's for you is for you, and anyone who isn't. And they'll filter themselves out. You know what I mean? Just like be you. So I think that's important. Be authentically you if you can, to the extent that you can. Look for people who let you be you. I think in terms of connection to nature, whew, man, just like go outside, listen to the birds, reclaim the park. I think there's incredible power in green space, outdoor space, just sitting and listening and breathing, and in the recognition that we are nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's not separate from us. We are it. We're subject to the whims of the moon, you know. As the planet heats up, we feel that at a cellular level. We are nature. I don't know if that really answers the question, but I mean, I'm really mostly speaking from my own experience.
Thank you.
I was thinking about your invitation to us to kind of realize when we are capable of showing up for someone else, right? I mean, today I made mistakes in my calendar, and this happens with my less and less over the years. There are fewer and fewer mistakes. I actually realized I made a mistake before that I missed the thing, so that was a big deal in my 30s. Yeah, so in my 40s, I said I'm doing much better, but once in a while. So I needed to help. There was a deadline. I had to move. We have chosen family coming to visit this weekend at my mom's, and we were moving a portable bed over there, and she needs the bed to be ready for the guests. But I was like, okay, today is the day then. And I just felt myself just really short. And I was like, oh, she needs to eat something before we get back in the car. Okay. Like, okay, I'm just going to use my phone to check my work email, and I can feel myself doing the thing. And she had such grace for me. And I could tell she felt she felt bad. Like she was like, oh, I'm sorry, I need to eat. And then I was like, oh gosh, I just affected the way that my mom felt about feeding herself when she needs to eat something. I did apologize, I thanked her for her patience with me. I really appreciated her presence in that moment, because she just let me be like a little mess for a few moments. And because she allowed me to do that, it allowed me to see what was happening. And I was like, oh, I got to take like a deep breath. Okay. It still didn't help me feel very relaxed, but it did help me to be like, oh, I have a moment to be present with my mom. And it's going to be a short moment, but it felt much better after that. So I did. It's nice when someone can. I mean, Angela, I feel like you offer that to me often. Like, I'm sure I know you're busy too, but there's something about the way that Angela shows up that's like, and here we are now. We are here now. I really appreciate that about your friendship. Because my brain gets very easily swept away by the wind, for example. But I guess that's what I was trying to think of today. I was like, I never call on air for grounding. And I was like, what is that? I like that, but air is a very important element. And just because I don't understand what it's doing doesn't mean it's not valuable. And this is like a transition time of year. This is like September where we live. So it's like beginnings, transitions. And I was just like, whew, we're endings. Yes, I know what to think about that. It's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Well, and breath. In what you just shared, you at one point said, oh, I need to take a big breath. I mean, I think that's a big answer too to the question, how do we connect? How do we, relate? How do we ground? Big breath, and that's air. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Sister Solana in the episode with her said, and like air like moves. It like moves fire and it moves the water. And like our anger is sometimes the fire. And well, we as humans are mainly water. And so the breath moves those two things when we breathe in. Yeah. Mm. Oh, this has been so beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Kia.
Yeah, thank you
uh,
so much. Dr. Key, is there anything else that you would like to offer our listeners?
I was thinking about our pre-conversation.
mm,
Um, and to the recent, just what we were just talking about, taking a breath, taking a pause, taking rest. I did want to underline, like several times, how powerful it is to bake rest into your life in very concrete ways beyond the whole, I get to the end of the day and I get to sleep,
yeah,
and treat, because I think it's this, that nobody's coming to save us, right? That we
right.
are responsible for ourselves, 100% responsible for ourselves. And also, and I'm talking about adults because, kids, we are responsible for them too. But as adults, we are also empowered to make decisions about our lives and how we're going to live our
Mhm,
lives. And it's easy to feel, because of the systems we live under, like we don't have that power, but we do. And we don't always have good choices, but we do have choices. But one of the choices we get to make is that sacred no, and to sort of put some boundaries around the space where we also aren't doing, but instead are being, eating, chewing well, letting ourselves digest our food, resting, breathing, taking a break. Um, and I think in the places where that is so profoundly constrained that there isn't enough power in the individual, that's where we absolutely need the collective. I'm present to the fact that there was a man lost his life to the hands of the state
mm,
recently.
mhm,
It's yesterday, and what that signaled to so many people, to more and more people, was the need for us to collectively dismantle the system, the carceral system, to collectively speak up for that human being who was innocent, to, all these things. So I think in the spaces where the individual doesn't have the power to make those decisions about rest and pause and freedom, we have an obligation as a collective to refuse to let that stand. And in the places where we do have the power, I think we owe it to ourselves. This is a way that we honor the promise to ourselves to demand to be whole. And that includes taking space for rest. And I think that was because of our earlier conversation about people experiencing burnout and being, really susceptible to these kinds of conditions that feel impossible. Um, I think there's a piece of that that's also about asking for help when you need it, you know,
mm,
because we can't do it by ourselves, but also we are our own captains, right? Like we
mhm,
are the boss of our lives. So um, I speak to that because I had to learn that lesson the hard way. I didn't figure out that I needed to really unapologetically claim space for rest until I was already chronically ill.
mhm,
And so I know a lot of your listeners are people who are carrying the weight not only of their own lives, but of other people's lives. They're people who are responsible for young people, and that's huge. And that is, I think, sacred work. Um, and if we don't pour back into ourselves and replenish ourselves, we can't continue the work.
mhm,
And
mm,
there is something so heartbreaking about not having the literal energy to self actualize, to show up, to be in connection. So I think the only thing I would say is just be really unapologetic about those boundaries, about that rest, about asking for help, and about making the choices that you can make in your life that orient you toward well-being and thriving.
Thank you for your medicine.
Yes, thank you for that.
Receiving. Ah. And thanks to our listeners. To keep the conversation going and for monthly reflection prompts related to each episode, sign up for our mailing list.
If you want to play with us in real time, exploring the ideas in this episode, please come to the next campfire chat. We look forward to our next sacred conversation with you.
Check out the show notes for details.